Hi, my name is Angel. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to what I believe is episode 10 of my Reading Different Subgenres series. As you guys can tell, for December we are doing Creature Feature, which I specifically chose for December because I knew that there was going to be some snowy ones to choose from, and I really like having my snowy reads in December. So I believe the most obvious one is The Terror by Dan Simmons, which is a chunky book. This is over 750 pages, but it has been one that I've wanted to read for a while. Like, this is a classic horror. It is very popular and it is very well loved. So I really hope I can read this one and it's going to give me that atmospheric snowy vibe and also deliver on the creature feature front. So that is the first book for this video. Then we also have Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant, which I know nothing about except that it's about mermaids, and it's really funny because I just recently met Brooklyn from Brooklyn's library and we were book shopping together, and I think we saw this book in the bookstore and she mentioned it. She was like, "Oh, have you read that?" And I was like, "No." It's just one of those books that for me, I would always see it, but I was in my head, I was like, I don't want to read that. And now here we are. I'm going to read it. I'm actually kind of excited. This is another longer one. This is 450 pages, I think. I will also be picking up Below by Laurel Hightower on my Kindle. This is a novella, and I think it has to do with Mothman. I have read from Laurel Hightower before. I have enjoyed her book Crossroads, but I did not enjoy her other one, which I can't even remember the title of. The other book that I selected for this video is Snow by Ronald Malfi, who I've never read from before, but I know he has a lot of books out there and a lot of horror readers do enjoy. But I have that one on hold right now from Libby because it's not physically available through my library. So if that hold comes through, I will be reading that one. If the hold does not come through, I do have, I don't even know how to say this, Ararat by Christopher Golden, which is another snowy creature feature, obviously. So I'm not 100% sure if I'll be reading this in this video, but it will either be this or Snow by Ronald Malfi. But we are starting off the video strong because I'm here to tell you that I've already read the first book for this video, which was The Watchers by A.M. Shine. I ended up picking this up on audio, and I'm really excited that I got to read it because I know it just got made into a movie and I really wanted to watch the movie. And it ended up being a lot shorter of a book than I expected, and it was very, very fast paced. So I got through the audiobook very, very quickly before I even had time to sit down and give you guys an update. So I'm finally here. I really let my thoughts sink in with this one, and I think I've decided to land on a 3.5 star as my rating. So let me tell you what this book is about. This takes place in Ireland, and it has to do a lot with folklore and mythology and creatures in a forest. So we start off with a super strong prologue of these people, this man specifically who is running through this forest, and he is in grave danger. We don't really know what's happening, but it kind of brings us into the story. And then we switch over to our main character, who is Mina, and she is on this job where she is delivering a bird to this customer, and she has to drive through Ireland and out in the country on all these country back roads, and she ends up getting lost. And then her car dies, and she has no choice but to get out and start walking with this bird. And as she is doing so, she's walking through the forest. This old woman stops and sees her and is like, "Hurry up, run, get in before it gets dark," basically. So she runs into the door that this woman is holding open, and it turns out that this is what they refer to as the coop, which is essentially this room, this box that has a, what is that word? Two-way mirror? Is that the correct word? Where they cannot see out, but the things outside can see in. And so we basically come to learn that there are 4 people, including Mina, our main character, that are stuck in this coop. And every night after the sun goes down, they must be inside or else they will literally die, because there are creatures that live in the forest. They live underground, and they come out after the sun goes down, and they come over to this little coop and they watch the people inside. Hence the title being The Watchers. So these people inside cannot see out through the glass, so they don't really know what these creatures are, what they want, why they're watching them, why they're there, why they come from underground, like what is going on with this forest. It was definitely intriguing and, like I said, very, very fast paced from beginning to end. Like there's constantly things going on. It's very high stakes, obviously, like these people are in a lot of danger, but then there's also this mystery of like, how did this place come to be? What are these creatures? And that's pretty much what we follow through the story. As far as the book itself, I did enjoy it to a certain extent, but the more that I started to think about it after finishing it, I do think there's a lot of plot holes within the story and a lot of things that you don't really get answers for. It kind of felt like it's a super intriguing premise and the author knew that and wanted to portray that, and they definitely came across really, really well with that, with having your attention and bringing you into this very quick moving world. But it felt like they didn't want to think too hard about all of the details of how everything worked, and they were like, we're just gonna skip over this and hope that nobody asks questions, but I have questions. I don't know if that makes sense. I just feel like the author wanted to execute this idea but didn't want to go so deep into it as to really work out all the kinks, and they didn't, unfortunately. There is a little bit of a twist in this book that did take me by surprise, but ultimately in the end I felt a little bit dissatisfied after finishing it. I feel like the end could have been much better. However, if we're talking in terms of the movie, this book is like a 5-star compared to what the movie was, because the movie was just like so not good, and they changed a lot of things as well. And I think, like I said, the ending in the book I wasn't a super big fan of, but compared to the way that the movie ended, like the book is like so much better. I know it's not really fair to sit here and like talk about my feelings towards the book based off of how I feel towards the movie, and I'm not trying to do that. Like these are two separate things in my head. The movie is like 2 stars for me, but the book I can still give 3.5 stars because I do appreciate some of the things that were done. I do appreciate some of the characters and their relationships to each other. Once again, it was like super intriguing and had a very, very strong start, but all of the details were not fleshed out and really thought about before bringing this book to life. However, I did enjoy like the folklore and the mythology and what the creature is within the story, which I'm not going to give away because I think it's really fun to get that reveal and learn with the characters, but I really did like what the actual creature was within the story. So that was The Watchers. That was technically the first book for this vlog. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to update you guys as I was reading it, but let's go ahead and move on to book number 2. So book number 2 I have decided is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant, which I am just about 30% of the way through. I've been listening to it on audio, so in the physical book that is page 135. I do plan to go back and forth between audio and physically reading, but I just like consuming audiobooks when I'm doing other things because it makes my life a little bit easier. But this one I'm really, really excited for because it is a mermaid creature feature. So essentially, there was this boat that went out into like where the Mariana Trench is, and their whole goal was to film a mockumentary because it was sponsored by they're called like Imagine Studios, and it's like this film studio, and they were going to film a mockumentary about mermaids, and then it turned out that there were actually real killer mermaids there that killed the entire crew. And since the whole goal of it was to film for like this mockumentary, there was cameras on board everywhere that did send back real footage of these people being like killed by these mermaids, and it ended up getting leaked and it was this big thing. And of course there's plenty of people in the public that call it a hoax, but then you have the people that work for the company and have personal relationships with the people that were on this boat, and they don't believe that it was a hoax because how could it be? So now we're a little bit into the future, and this same company is sponsoring another expedition out to the Mariana Trench to try to figure out what really happened to that first boat and if there is actually mermaids living in the ocean. So they are much more prepared this time around. They have taken like every precaution with the ship, and it's like a huge ship. I think they said that the capacity is like 1,000 people, but they have 400 people that are going on this specific expedition, which is a lot of people. And they are all what is the word, oceanography, like they all are scientists and researchers that study different things with the ocean. So we have a lot of characters that we're following right now, but our main character, I don't even know her name. Tori. Of course I know that. Her name is Tori, and she's a marine biologist, and she specializes in, I don't know what it's called, like sonography or something, where it's like has to do with sounds that come from the deep sea and like mapping out areas of the deep sea and like trenches and mountains and acoustic findings of sounds that have happened. I don't understand all of the science stuff that's going on, but her sister was actually one of the women that was on the first ship that got killed by these mermaids, and so she kind of has her own like personal motives for wanting to go on this expedition, but then she also has dedicated a lot of her life to researching this and trying to find out what's really down there in the Mariana Trench. So that's like the main person we're following, but we also have a lot of other researchers. We have a professor who studies like mermaids full time, like her official job title is like mermaid researcher. We have a set of twins who are deaf, and their older sister who is hearing but is their like interpreter, and one of the twins is like a submersible operator, I think is the correct terminology for that, and she is like really focused on like getting to Challenger Deep, wanting to go to the deepest part in the ocean, and I don't know why you would ever want to do that. Her sisters are very against that, and I am on their side because like fuck that. So we have a pretty big cast that we're following, but I think it's really interesting so far, and I'm just really excited to see where it goes. I'm excited for the killer mermaids to come out, and I'm also just excited for that like deep sea horror, because that's something that freaks me out, and I also enjoy reading, but I feel like I don't read a whole lot of it. So it's honestly, I feel like very refreshing for me to pick this up, especially because it wasn't one that I ever like thought twice about before. So I'm really happy that I'm here reading it, because I think like I have a good feeling about this one. I feel like this is something that I could really enjoy. So I honestly don't have a lot to say about it right now. They have just gotten to their destination at the Mariana Trench, and so all of these researchers are starting to gather data and conduct their own personal research, but then we also have like the filming television show side of it, which they are filming everything that happens here to eventually go on television, but they don't want to do that until like they get on film proof of mermaids, so that way once the episodes go up they can just keep pumping them out. Essentially it's all about money and all about views and attention, of course. I think it's really interesting. I feel like I'm learning a lot about just this field of work of studying the ocean and how many different areas you can go into and study within there, and I think it's really interesting, and I'm very excited for the horror. I'm excited for the mermaids to come out. Like I'm ready. I want to see what happens, and I just have a really good feeling about this book, and I'm really excited to keep reading it. Ignore my post-workout look, but I am now on page 246, chapter 20 of Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. I'm still enjoying it. There are a few things that I'm not the biggest fan of, but I do think it's really interesting. Things are definitely picking up. The mermaids are a really big part of the story right now. There has been a death, actually 2 deaths since the last time that I talked to you guys, and I think it's doing some interesting things. We're getting into a little bit of like some conversation on ethics, obviously with the impact that humans have had on the earth and the oceans specifically and marine life. Obviously that's a big part of this, but also like the ethics of this expedition in general. Like everybody that's there signed like a waiver to say, you know, there is a possibility that there will be injuries or death, but they were sold this idea that everything was protected and the highest measures of security were being taken. But there has been discussion that it seems like all of the members on the security team are young and attractive men, and that maybe they were just hired because they're attractive and it's for television, and maybe they don't really have the skill and expertise. There are also a lot of safety features on the ship that are supposed to be like the save all and protect everybody from an eventual attack or a probable attack from the mermaids, but those things were never fully tested before they embarked on this journey, so now they are not working, and none of the passengers aboard are made aware of this. They all still think that that safety feature is there for them if something does happen. So it's kind of interesting because, like I said, there is a lot of debate and like ethical things that you can think of within the story that the author is bringing to light. I think the horror is really, really good. I'm really enjoying like the deep sea themes and also the whole idea of mermaids, because I've never really read anything with mermaids. And it is really funny because I remember like being a kid, and I'm sure everybody had this like positive, happy view of mermaids until watching, I think it was Peter Pan, right? And they're like stuck. Is it Peter Pan? Okay, I need to Google this. Where the like creepy mermaids come out, and then being a kid and watching that and being like, oh my god, mermaids aren't nice. Like mermaids kill people? Okay. This is what I'm talking about. Wow, you cannot see that. The creepy mermaids from the live action Peter Pan. And that was a moment in my childhood where I was like, oh my god, what do you mean? Like what do you mean? Why are the mermaids like so creepy and evil? But I really do think if mermaids do exist, that's how they are. So that's really, really interesting. I'm enjoying it. I really like the writing and the descriptiveness of it all. It's really like the imagery is great, and I can picture everything perfectly. I can picture exactly what these mermaids look like. I can picture the surroundings of the ocean and the ship that they're on, and all of these characters are described really, really well, and I am enjoying all of that. But there are other times where I'm really not a big fan because it's really almost feels like it's playing into the popular like horror trope of people just being dumb. For example, the first death that we had, it was just like really stupid. Like this character was just making the stupidest decisions, and I'm over here like yelling at the book like, girl, if you don't get your ass out of here. Does she listen? No, of course not. But it was giving me that feeling of like when you're watching a really bad horror movie and you're like, if this bitch goes in the basement right now, I'm done. And that's like how I felt about this book. And then I was like, okay, well maybe that was just like a one-time thing. But then there was another situation where there was like high stakes and danger, and these people are just being like really, really dumb, and they're like, oh my god, like a mermaid's here. How did that happen? We all knew how it was gonna happen, because you guys were stupid. Other than that, I am really, really enjoying it, and it's very, very fast moving. I like the characters. I know I said like Tori is kind of our main character, but we really are following like a wide cast of characters. There's also a little bit of a budding romance between two female characters in here, so I'm really enjoying that, and I'm really excited to see that develop. Overall, it's going mostly well. Like, I'm still enjoying it. Once again, I think the writing and the atmosphere is like the biggest thing for me, and then also just because I've never read anything with mermaids, I feel like it's really pulling me deeper into the story. I think if this was like a creature or something that I've kind of read about before, I wouldn't be as into it, but because it's so different from anything that I've read, I'm really, really liking it. Everyone say hello to my special guest Luke Hemmings and also my special guest Lil. This is not book related, but I need to tell somebody about it because my boyfriend doesn't appreciate it like I do. But this is signed. This is a signed vinyl from my favorite white boy, who I've been obsessed with for way too long. Anyway, I finished this on audio just now, And my audiobook activity for the night was making this little Lego set. This is a plum blossom my boyfriend got me for my birthday. He is very much into Legos. He loves to build things, and he wanted to get me some flowers that will last forever and not die. So I was listening to the audiobook while I did this. I'll put in a little time lapse while I talk about it in case you guys want to see. Anyways, Into the Drowning Deep, I think I'm gonna give 4 stars. Honestly, I really enjoyed it. There were some elements, like I told you guys, there were definitely dumb characters and there were definitely like very unlikable characters, but I feel like that just made it more fun because it feels like it's not silly because it's not a silly book, but like, I don't know, when you think of like classic horror movies and like tropes within the genre, like there's always those dumb characters, or there's always like the really unlikable characters that you're like, oh, I just can't wait for these people to die. And that was the same way in this book. I also really enjoyed like the premise of it because we have this ship full of scientists and biologists and whatever their official titles are. So everything within the book, like everything was very scientific. It wasn't just like, oh my god, like these mermaids are coming out and killing us and it's so scary and bloody and brutal, although it was all of those things, but at the same time they were researching these creatures and learning more about their language, about how they act, how they hunt, how they live, and constantly making discoveries about the mermaids themselves, which I just thought was really, really fun because, like I said, sometimes with horror or creature features you don't always get that. It's just kind of like this creature exists and nobody really knows how or why, but it's here and it's killing us. So this kind of went a little bit more in depth, and I think that definitely attributed to the length of it because we're getting the scientific side of things, but we're also getting the bloody, gory death scenes. Another fun thing about this book, I forgot to mention in my last update, is not only are we following all of these characters throughout the story, but we also get a few POV chapters from the mermaids themselves. There's also a chapter that is like the point of view of these dolphins that are involved in the story, and I just thought that was a really, really interesting and fun element and really enhanced the experience. I will say, oh my gosh, the ending took me for a ride because I was literally like, it was like 10 minutes left in the book and something was happening and it was giving me anxiety because I was like, what's gonna happen? I was like, is everybody just going to die? Or are we going to end on a cliffhanger? Because I did see on Goodreads that this was part of the series, so I went and looked because I was like, oh my god, there's got to be a sequel. But then I realized that it's part of a series because there is a prequel to it. So then I started to panic even more. I was like, oh my god, is it going to end on a cliffhanger and there's not going to be a sequel? Does the sequel still have yet to come out? Once again, is everybody just going to die? So I was a little bit nervous at the end because I feel like things were a little bit rushed, and I still, like, I think that we left off in a good spot, but I do think that a sequel would do a lot of good for the story because there's something really, really cool that is introduced towards the end, which obviously I can't like explain what it is, but I thought it was like really interesting and I thought it was absolutely horrifying and I want to know more about it. But that was introduced like I said within the last 10 minutes of the audiobook, so like the last 10 pages or so, and I'm like, what? Like I want more of that thing. Aside from the horror, there's also a lot of tension within, you know, all of the characters here, and we talk a lot about their relationships to one another. Once again, we have kind of a little bit of a romance, but then there's some drama with like exes, and then there's the sisters that we're following, and I think it was all really, really interesting. I think the characters were really well fleshed out, and I liked following their relationships to each other, especially in such dire circumstances where you kind of have to put aside all of that and still work together and overcome this thing. But I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was really good. I really, really enjoyed the writing. Once again, like the imagery and the atmosphere within here I think was done really, really well. It's bloody, it's nasty, and it's just kind of like everything that you would hope for when you're going into a deep sea mermaid horror. So I would definitely recommend this one. Like I said, I'm giving it 4 stars. I'm very, very happy. That is Into the Drowning Deep completed. Now we will see what book number 3 is. Listen, the lighting is not that great right here, but I've messed around with it for too long, so we're just gonna deal with it. I have been reading, slowly but surely, I have been reading this chunky freaking book. I told myself that I would update you guys when I was like 25% of the way through because it is so big, so I wanted to get a good amount through. And I am now, I think, 31% of the way through, although it doesn't feel like it when I look at this and I'm like, I still have that much to read. I've mostly been reading this on my Kindle because, like, so I don't have to carry this around, but I also have listened to it a little bit on audio. I was doing that today. I'm going to try my best to like explain this and talk about how I feel because, to be quite honest, I'm not really a big fan. Like, I'm a little bit bored, but that's definitely a personal preference. It's not really anything against the book. Like, this is a very popular book, a very widely loved book. I see so many 5-star reviews for this book. So many people love it. So I'm not hating on the book as a whole, but me personally, I've like never really been a fan of like a lot of historical stuff, and this is very heavy on the historical side. It takes place in the 1800s. It was also based on a true story, which I didn't originally know. I honestly had no clue what this was about, except that I knew it was a horror that took place in the Arctic Circle, and after that I had no clue. But this is based on a real expedition of the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. So these were 2 ships that back in the 1800s they were sent off to find the Northern Passage, and I think there were like 130 or 129 people in the crew that perished. They were never seen again, and nobody truly knows exactly what happened. There are a lot of different theories of what did happen. So this is a praise that I will give to the book, is that it's like very well researched. A lot of the details within the expedition, from what I found just like briefly reading online, like the author really did go into detail and did his homework for this book with the conditions of living back in this time period. This is like 1846 and 1847 are the 2 primary years that we're following right now, and the narrative does jump back and forth, so you have to really pay attention at the beginning of the chapter to which year you're in. But also the conditions of what it was like to sail during that time, what it was like to be on a boat like this that is made out of wood, and just the way that life was. And then there are also a lot of references to the Inuit people. They actually have an Inuit woman that is staying with them because they kind of like found her, and there are no tribes or colonies that are anywhere near to where they are, so they just kind of have adopted this Inuit woman, and she is mute because she had her tongue what looks like bitten or chewed out by something as a child. So I hope we get more information on that. I realized I just kind of went off into like the actual history surrounding this and not really telling you what the actual book is about, but this is obviously a fictional recount of these events that happened. So we're following the crew of the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror as they are on this expedition into the Arctic Circle, and they are frozen in for the winter, so they are just completely surrounded by ice. And there is a creature that is out there that has killed some people and is tormenting these people in the boats, and I'm really excited for that aspect to pick up because that is definitely like my favorite part of the book so far, like the only thing that's keeping me going, but that's also the only reason that I'm reading it for this video anyways, because it's a creature feature. This is, I like hate holding this up, it's too big, I'm not gonna do it anymore. The landscape is very bleak. Obviously, like, everything's very barren and desolate. It is just ice and snow that they are surrounded by, where it's like feet of ice above the actual water because it's the dead of winter. Anyway, I am about 230 pages through. This is like 760 something pages in total, and to be honest, I'm having a really hard time like focusing because once again, I'm just like not the biggest fan of historical things in general. I do think that the true story surrounding this is really interesting, and it is interesting, very atmospheric, and really interesting to learn about just what it was like back then to be on an expedition like this and to be freezing your butt off. Like even in the boat that is heated, the warmest it gets is like 40 degrees, which is so crazy because I'm sure when you're in those conditions where outside is -50, if you go inside to where it's 40 degrees and you still have to wear a winter coat, like that's gonna feel like summer to you. And so I think it's really interesting and very, very atmospheric, and I am enjoying that part of it, but I'm just not a really big fan of the writing, and I feel like there's so much extra stuff that doesn't really need to be included. Like, I don't even know what the word is. Like pointless dialogue, it feels like, between all of these people, and I feel like there's no real distinction between the characters, at least not in my head. I feel like every single person in this book, except for the Inuit woman that we're following, every single person could be like the same exact person and it would make no difference to me because in my head that's what it feels like. I truly don't understand why it was in the book. It was this guy reflecting on, I think, like 7 years in the past of a romantic escapade that he had with a woman, and then it started to get very sexual, and I was listening to this on audio. I have live footage. I will cut to that right now. I'm quite literally in the middle of a workout right now, but I just had to stop because, first of all, I don't understand why this chapter is included in the book, but they just said the word prick and private part in the same sentence, and then went on to talk about hairy pubes and nipples, and then he's talking about his erection, and then the word foreskin just happened, and I'm sitting over here trying to work out, listening to this on audio, and I'm like, why am I hearing about foreskin right now? I just had to stop to do this update because, like, I'm baffled. I'm speechless. Like what's going on? That was a odd and unpleasant experience, and I don't really understand why that chapter was in there, and there are a lot of different things where, like, my eyes start to glaze over while I'm reading it and I just kind of like zone out, and then they're like, oh, but the monster is out on the ice, and then I'm like, okay, my attention's back, tell me more, and then they go off for another like 50 pages rambling about all these other things, which I'm sure to some people they could really, really enjoy, but personal preference, I don't like it. That's all I'm gonna say about the terror for now because I feel like I'm rambling. But I feel like there are things that I do like about it, and I can appreciate it for what it is, for being well researched and for being very atmospheric and for being so bleak, and that's really the goal of the story. But there are also a lot of things that I just don't really like. There's sirens outside, so I think that's my cue to stop recording before it gets too loud. Perhaps I was a bit too harsh on this book at first. I am now 80% of the way through the terror. I am on page 609, which is chapter 51, so a pretty good chunk through the book now. And I will definitely say, like, there are still some parts where my eyes are glazing over and I'm like, why am I reading this right now? But for the most part, I'm really enjoying it. I will say, to talk about it on like a creature feature level, I think that it's really interesting because, like, there is a creature in here, it is a creature feature, but the creature kind of takes, like, I don't know, it's just not a very big part of the story. Like, it definitely is because it's this looming threat throughout the entire story, but the main focus within the book is the historical aspect of it and telling the real story, obviously a fictional account of the real story, but then also just going through all of the survival elements. So there are a lot of different things that are impacting the people here. I know I mentioned like the lead poisoning thing already, which is definitely very prominent. Also scurvy, which was just a big thing at this time in general. And they did mention at the beginning that they had like lemon juice for that specific purpose. Everybody had like their daily shot of lemon juice that they had to do to get their vitamin C to avoid getting scurvy, but as they're stuck there for longer than they expected, the supplies are dwindling, and then it also kind of loses its effect the longer that it sits there, so it's not really like working as well as it should. So a lot of the men are really affected by scurvy, which just sounds so awful. Also, of course, like the weather conditions, being in such cold and like a brutal landscape is really going to take the lives of some people and not help anything. And now we have gotten to this point where they have left the boats. They have made the executive decision to leave the boats and to start walking, and they're trying to find like this river so that they can sail out of there in these other like little boats. So they are walking across this ice and this land for hours at a time, and they're pulling these boats that are full of their supplies, but it's also full of all of their sick and injured people, and they have very limited rations of food. They get like a biscuit and a slice of meat every day, and it's really interesting because it's talking about the effect on that and how, you know, they spend the entire day pretty much walking, and sometimes they only walk like 1, 2, or 3 miles in a day because they are just that worn down, and it's just a lot of physical strain on the body on top of all of the other things that they're already dealing with: the weather, the scurvy, starving to death. So I do think it's really interesting, and it's the parts that I'm enjoying. I am really enjoying, but then we get those parts where I'm kind of like, okay, I'm a little bit bored, but I think that the elements of the story that are really strong are definitely making up for those pieces where I'm really bored. Once again, this creature is really interesting too. I feel like we don't really know exactly what it is. It's described as like a white bear, like a polar bear, obviously, that you'd see in the Arctic, but it's much bigger. And it also, from the interactions that they've had with it, it seems like it's a very smart creature. Like, it is playing with these men and it is taunting them. They just mentioned at one point that they were walking and they kept finding these red splotches, and they realized that it was other polar bears that were being killed and eaten, and they're wondering like, okay, obviously it was this creature that killed all of these bears, but why did it do that? Oh, because it doesn't want to leave anything for us to kill and to eat. So it's clearly like an intelligent creature that has a lot of like intention behind its actions, and I think that's really interesting as well. It is bleak and just utterly hopeless and so depressing because of all of the different factors that these men are facing. And like, in that situation, you know that there's like a 99% chance that you're going to die, but you have to try to come up with a plan to stay alive, and then also like following the captain and the people in power, like to be able to spread out like a message of hope almost to all of the crew to keep them going and working, while you know that like there really is no hope for anybody, but you have to keep these people motivated and thinking that they're going to survive in order to get anything done. But it is very depressing and it's very dark. We're getting to this point in the story where they are talking about the reality that if they do want to continue to survive for an extended amount of time in the future, they might have to start eating their dead and waiting for their sick and injured people to die so that they can consume them. It's definitely a heavy book, but I feel like I'm learning so much because this is not something that I knew about before, and I think that's like a big thing. I think Dan Simmons and this book in general really introduced this whole piece of history to a lot of people, and I think that is really awesome that he could teach so many people about this real life thing. So I'm very curious where the last 20% will go. Obviously, knowing like the real story, nobody survived. I don't know if the author is going to choose to change that and give some of these characters a happy ending. I don't think that's very likely, but I am really interested to see how he decides to end the story, and I'm really actually enjoying it. I have finished The Terror, and I am happy to report that I think I'm gonna give it 4 stars. Honestly, this book really grew on me, and I really started to have a very big appreciation for it by the end. Aside from everything else I've already told you guys about, another thing that I thought was really fascinating about this book is the use of Inuit culture. Dan Simmons, clearly he has researched, like I said, plenty of times before, not only the expedition itself, but what the landscape was like at that time, what sailing was like at that time, and then also dives into Inuit culture and how they survived off the land, which I think was really fascinating. There was a really big chapter towards the end that went a lot into that, and I was reading that on my Kindle and just highlighting so much stuff. We also get a really good explanation and description of what this creature is that's on the ice with them, which I thought was really interesting as well. And I also really appreciated some of the conversation and commentary that he brought into the story as well, with like racism that these groups has faced, especially back during this time. I mean, it's really interesting because I think of like how much they've gone through as a whole over the years, and even to think of like the word Eskimo, which obviously is used within the book because of the time that it takes place in, but I feel like that was only like the last like 10 years or so that people really stopped using that word, because I remember when I was young in school and we learned about that, we learned about the Eskimos, and it wasn't until I would say the last decade or so where people started to realize how harmful that word is, and the connotations behind that. And so it was really interesting to see the way that they're treated within the book. Obviously I can't go like too far into that because of spoilers, but then also comparing that to like the real life history, how there were Inuit people that were like, hey, we saw the people from this expedition that you're looking for, but nobody really wanted to believe them, and they were just kind of like brushed off for years and years before somebody went back and said like, hey, I think these people were actually right. Like, I think that the things that they're telling us that they saw really did happen to these people. So it's really interesting on that front. I did enjoy the ending. Overall, like I said, I do really appreciate this book for what it is, and I am glad that I read it, and I'm glad that I stuck with it because I did end up enjoying it so much. So right now I'm landing at a 4. I almost feel like it could be higher than that, like 4.5 stars, but I do know that I wasn't enjoying it too much in the beginning. But reflecting back on that, like obviously it's such a long book that the beginning is going to be a slower build up to begin with. Another thing in the beginning of the book is that it jumps around in the timeline a little bit, which makes it a little bit harder to follow. You really have to pay attention to what timeline you're in and what characters you're with. So I can understand it taking a little bit to get into. I would say if you are like me, where you were reading the first 30% and you're like, okay, like I don't understand what's going on, I would say give it like 50 to 60% to let yourself really get into the story, and then if you decide to call it quits from there, at least you gave it a good try. But I think things definitely do pick up after the slow start that we have, and it gets very immersive and just absolutely fascinating and so captivating. I'm gonna stop talking now before I just start rambling in circles, but side note, I did start watching the show tonight. We watched the first 2 episodes, and I will say, like, I am very into the show. Maybe because I've read the book already, but it's like historical stuff like that is not normally something that I enjoy, but I guess that just goes to show that Dan Simmons can tell a great story, because he really held my attention. Once I was hooked, like I was in it, and the show is like the same way, like I am hooked. Anyway, that's all for the terror. Let's go ahead and start book number 4. So it appears I have somehow accidentally deleted the footage of me talking about this, but book number 4 was Below by Laurel Hightower, which is like a Mothman novella. This also takes place in winter and has that wintry vibe, which I did really appreciate. But we are following a woman who is driving through the night, and she stops at a truck stop while a snowstorm is starting to blow in. Basically, she meets up with the truck driver there, and they kind of decide to have this pact together where they will drive together. She will follow him in his truck, and they will communicate over the CB radio. just so he can let her know, you know, if there's any ice coming up, any accidents, anything to be on the lookout for. And then if something does go wrong in this weather, they can kind of be there for each other. And something does go wrong. The truck ends up sliding off of the road in this very interesting stretch, and she, our main character, is basically forced to decide like how far she will go for a stranger. Does she leave him there? Does she try to call for help? And then what happens when she's unable to do either of those things? Does she climb down and risk her life to save this man? It's the dead of night, it's snowing, it's freezing, and there's also this Mothman-esque creature taunting her in the surrounding areas. So it was interesting and unique. Certainly it was gory and bloody, and the horror was definitely there, but I think ultimately I'm gonna land on 3 stars because I had a lot of questions at the end. There were different elements brought into the story that never fully got addressed or explained, and I wish we got a little bit more from those things because at the end I'm like still confused on a lot of different parts of this story. But I do think Laurel Hightower is a great author, and she really knows how to do horror, bloody horror and gross horror, and also really fleshes out her characters and gives you a reason to care about them and gives them a backstory that is a little bit interesting. So there are things I liked about it, but in the end I had a lot of questions about this one. But it was a really fun little wintry creature feature, and it was Mothman, which I've never read a Mothman book either, so I do appreciate that. It was a quick read, and that's all I'm gonna say. I'm really sorry that I lost the footage. I don't know how that happened, but here we are. Good morning. We are now on to book number 5 for this video, which is Snow by Ronald Malfi. I have been slowly making my way through this, but it's just been crazy leading up to Christmas. Obviously, my boyfriend's dad was here for a couple of days, so I didn't have too much time to read, and I also didn't really have any time to film, so that's why I'm here with this update today to let you know that I am 53% of the way through the book, and I have just gotten to part 2. So I figured it would be a good time to update you guys because I do plan on finishing this, and I was going to sit down and start reading, and I was like, I should really do an update because I haven't said anything about this book so far. This is my first Ronald Malfi book, and one thing I will say right off the bat is that the writing is very like easy, breezy, beautiful cover girl, meaning that it's very easy to digest, and it's been a very, very quick read so far. Like, I'm just absolutely flying through it. It's not too complicated to read, so I'm enjoying that. Another really fun thing, obviously it's like a wintry creature feature, which is what I wanted, but it also is a holiday book because this takes place on the night of Christmas Eve going into Christmas Day. So I think that's really, really fun and just kind of unexpected, and I really like that because obviously we are approaching Christmas right now. So we are following this man. His name is Todd, I believe, and he is very determined to see his son on Christmas Day. So he was supposed to fly out Christmas Eve to go visit him, but a huge snowstorm rolls in and all of the flights get canceled. So he pairs up with 3 other people, a woman kind of around his age and then an older couple, and they decide that all together they are going to rent a car and drive down there, which is a very, very bad idea because the conditions are absolutely horrible, very, very dangerous, and it's a little bit of a drive. So they're doing that, they're going along, and it's very sketchy. They're like the only car out there, and then on the side of the road they see this man, and he clearly looks like he's in need of help, and it's like negative 20 degrees outside. So they stop and they're like, "What's up? You good?" And he's basically like, "No, I'm not good. My car slid off the road and my 7-year-old, 8-year-old daughter like ran off and I can't find her." So obviously they're like concerned for this man. So they're like, let's try to find his little girl, because if they've been out there in negative 20 degrees and it's going on half an hour to an hour that they've been out there, like there's a good chance that this little girl might not be alive. So they're searching and things are just odd. Like, they know that there's something not right about this guy, but they can't quite put their finger on it. So they decide you know, there's a town coming up on the next exit off the highway, so let's just go there and see if we can get somebody to call the police and send a team out to look for this girl. So they're driving there. They get to this very, very small town and their car just like dies. So they get out and they're walking around and the town seems like deserted. Nobody's out. There are houses, there are buildings, but they're all totally dark. So they don't really think too much of it because they're like, well, it's a big storm. Maybe the power got blown out. Obviously nobody's going to be out walking around in these conditions anyway, so let's just see what happens. And let's just say not everything is as it seems in this small town, and I'm just gonna leave it there. But I do think it's really, really interesting. Like I said, it's going by very, very quickly, and something that I think is kind of unique is like the snow itself is the creature feature in this book. I'm not going to give away too much details, but I do think it's really interesting and very unique. But as far as that, like, it's following a very classic like storyline, horror storyline, especially like this type of thing where they're like stranded and it's a snowstorm and things are going weird and it's just like a fight for survival. And obviously we want to root for the main character because we learn more about him and his past and decisions that he's made in his past that have kept him from his son, and so we know that he's really determined to get to see his son, and of course we're going to want to root for him to be able to do that. So I am curious to see how they get out of this mess, where the story goes, and I don't really have too much else to say. Like, it's just very, it's not a storyline that's different from things that I've read before, so it's not like completely blowing my mind, but I do think it's interesting. I do think it's holding my attention. Like I said, very, very fast pace, a lot of action, just like this survival type of thing, and it's giving me like those winter holiday vibes, which I'm really enjoying, and I'm really interested to learn more about the creatures and if we can kind of figure out really what they are and where they come from, how they came to be. There are a lot of theories about why they do what they do and how they do what they do, but like there's nothing that they can really say for certain, and I don't know if we'll ever get that. But I am excited to finish this. Kindle says I have like 2 hours left, and my plan is to finish this today anyways, so we'll see what's happening. So I am finished with Snow by Ronald Malfi now. I think I'm going to give this one 3.5 stars because once again it didn't really do anything super crazy or super unique. It kind of followed a very traditional like horror storyline, but there were a lot of things that I really enjoyed about it, and overall it was a very entertaining read. I would definitely recommend this if you're looking for a winter holiday, very fast-paced read. It was gory at times. It had some unique creatures, some characters that you want to root for throughout the story, but then also a lot of classic horror tropes, and it was enjoyable, but it wasn't anything over the top spectacular. Unfortunately, I don't really have a lot to say about this one, although I did enjoy the creature in here, and I wish we got like a little bit more information really as to what these things are and where they came from, but it also makes sense that we are kind of left in the dark just like the characters. It's more of an action like survival type of story than something that really delves into the background of what this thing is, and that's fine with me because I still had a great time reading it. I liked the way that the story went. I like how things ended and the little bit of information we got at the end as well. It was overall a good read and I would recommend it. So that brings us now to the end of the video, which is also the end of this series because we are coming to the end of the year, and I think it's been a fun time. I think this was definitely a really fun series to film and to just have something to look forward to each month with a different subgenre, and I feel like I definitely learned some things and found some new favorites, found some new flops, but that's kind of always to be expected. Let me know if you guys have a favorite horror subgenre or if you have a favorite video that I did in this series. I would be really, really curious to see which one you guys like the best. I think body horror, I'd have to say, was the one that I came away with the most wins from, but I also really liked gothic, and I liked the cosmic horror as well. It was just a really fun time and a very kind of fun experiment for myself to learn a little bit more and read different things in different subgenres. So I will leave you all by saying Merry Christmas if you celebrate, Happy Hanukkah if you celebrate, because I know the first day of Hanukkah this year lands on the 25th, which is kind of interesting. And with all of that being said, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you guys next year.